All right. Now we got to talk about, okay, so, our brain has a pretty incredible ability to weed out information that we don't necessarily need or that we don't think is relevant. And our brain, one of our tendencies is our brain wants to see the world as unchanging. Um, because if we saw that everything is changing all the time, then it would be like a constant reset all the time. These are what are called perceptual constancies. Perceptual constancy is our tendency to perceive objects or environments as unchanging despite the change in a retinal image. Okay, so there are a couple different types of perceptual constancies. Shape constancy is where even if the retinal image, even if the shape of something has changed in your retinal image, you know that the actual matter of it has not changed. For instance, so right here, let's see. Okay, so right here, I have this wine caddy that my dad made. Okay, and so you're looking at it from this angle, all right, and you can see it's it's just a rectangle, right? If I rotate it around, right, the retinal image of this has changed, but you know that it has actually stayed the same. Okay, that's why you don't think like when a door opens and closes, right? Even though the retinal image has changed, the shape of it has stayed the same. This applies as well to size. So last class we talked about relative size, how things that are further away appear smaller to us, and that's one of the ways that we can tell distance with only one eye by the size of something. We do understand, though, that even if the size of something has changed, that just means that it's gotten further away. It has not actually gotten smaller. So, if I'm standing right here and then I walk into my kitchen, right? The retinal image of me has changed. I appear smaller, but you know that I am not growing and shrinking. Okay. All right. Here, this actually goes more along with like relative size. You don't need to know what a Ponzo illusion is, I don't think. But a Ponzo illusion is this illusion where if we are presented with objects that are the same size, but we perceive depth, all right, the one that is further away, we will actually perceive as bigger. So because of these depth cues right here, this is linear perspective. It says that this is getting further away, right? These three elephants are actually the same size, but we perceive this one as being bigger because it looks like it's further away. All right, the other constancy is color constancy. Color constancy is our brain's ability to sort of block out like outside light, like brightness and whatnot. And we understand that even if the hue of something has changed, even if the brightness of something has changed due to like lights turning on or off, we know that the actual color has stayed the same. Okay. And it's just due to the fact that when it's dark, our cones don't pick up as much color, so we don't see color as well. All right, but we know that even if I turn off the light, all right, and it looks like the color has changed, it's more so just based off of illumination. That's color constancy. Now, a lot of this too is based off of context. And the way that we perceive color is a lot of times based off the brightness of what is surrounding it. So you all remember the dress controversy from a couple years ago when, you know, wasn't it nice when like that was the biggest controversy that we had? Okay. Not like, everything else that's going on right now. Like the biggest thing was like, no, you asshole, it's white and gold. Like, okay. Stop cussing when I'm recording these. Okay. And so, like, what color do you see this dress? What color do you all see? Or colors? All right. All right. Aditi says blue and black. I don't. Rory, what did you say? Well, I just didn't hear. You cut out. See blue and black. Okay. All right. Anybody see white and gold? Okay. All right. Okay. What's interesting is whichever one you see, you can't see the opposite. Like I see blue and black. I've always seen blue and black. Right? And that's actually what color the dress actually is. Right? But the way that we perceive it is actually based off this right here and the light in the background, whether we think it is natural light, like from the sun, or unnatural light, like from a light. Okay, so it's that top-down processing that shows how crazy dominant that top-down processing is. All right. Same thing with this right here. What color do you see this shoe? What color is this shoe? Green and blue? Oh, gray and blue. Okay. All right, gray and green. Okay. Does anybody see it as pink and white? Yeah. Okay. All right. Again, I see it as like teal and gray. Right. I can actually see how it would be perceived though as pink and white. All depends on what your brain thinks the illumination is, whether they think there's light being directly reflected on it or not. All right. There's a video here about this. We're not going to watch it, but if you want to, you can. It's pretty interesting. Um, all right. So here's another kind of example of how context affects color. Which one's darker, that one or that one? Mhm. Has everybody just figured these out by now? The middle. Okay. All right. They're actually, this is like Adelson's checkerboard, the thing that we looked at the beginning of it. They're the same color. Okay. It's just based on the context. Because of the shading there, we perceive this one as being brighter because our brain says, all right, there's shadow, so our brain blocks out the shadow. It says whatever darkness we see is due to the shadow, not due to the color. This one's cool. All right. This square and this square are the same color. Okay. But we see this one as green and this one as red. Why do you think that is? Because of the background color. All right. If we change it all to gray, there we can see they are both the same color. All right. And then same thing here. All right. This is all the same shade of gray right here. All right. But we just see it as different because of the context surrounding it. Because this one is lighter around here, we actually see it as darker. Okay. It's actually hard to do that, but all right. Okay. Last thing. Sorry. Sensory deprivation. Okay. Sensory deprivation. when we are deprived of one of our senses at an early age, specifically sight, right? And then we gain it back later on. They have found that being deprived of it at an early age, what is called a critical period, right? We never develop those neural connections. So they did an experiment with cats where they, as kittens, they put them in this thing that was only vertical lines, no horizontal lines. And when they took them out, the cats could not perceive horizontal lines. Like they would run into anything that was horizontal. All right, they just literally couldn't see it. All right, they've seen the same thing with humans, with people who have like cataracts at a young age, which is where the lens is really cloudy and it makes you basically blind, but you can remove them. And they found that people who have that sometimes have a hard time recognizing shapes, even though they would be able to feel, they can feel what a circle, what a circle feels like, they're not able to visually recognize it because they never developed those feature detectors. All right, and then lastly, perceptual adaptation. So our brain has, just like everything else, has a wild ability to be able to adapt to whatever environment we're in. We are so malleable as human beings. Sensory adaptation is when your sensory receptors stop responding to stimulation. Perceptual adaptation is when your brain basically stops responding to stuff. And it accounts for any differences that we're exposed to, and it basically just gets used to them. So the most famous example of this is mostly in the visual field, right? Because vision dominates everything else. Famous example is a guy that wore inversion goggles. Inversion goggles are goggles that flip everything upside down. I can't remember for how long he wore them for. Let me see if I wrote it down last year. No. But so after about a week of everything being upside down, all of a sudden his brain flipped everything back right side up. So even though he was seeing things upside down, his brain accounted for it and says, this isn't right, right? And it flipped it back right side up. So he was able to go about and do everything normally, like he could ride a bike perfectly fine because his brain adapted to it and went back to sort of the baseline setting. Another example of perceptual adaptation is faces and recognizing faces. So we adapt to faces that look similar to ours. We have an easier time recognizing faces that are similar to ours, meaning kind of in the same ethnic background. That's why, have you all ever heard like people say like, I have a hard time telling apart like people of this ethnicity or this ethnicity or this. And it's kind of racist sounding, and a lot of times it is. But there's also sort of a biological basis for it. We have a harder time telling a difference between people of a different ethnicity if we are not exposed to that ethnicity a lot. All right. Because our brain, what it does is when we look at faces, especially faces that we find recognizable, we actually only pay attention to specific features that make each of us recognizable, and then we kind of ignore the rest of it. Whereas with faces we're not used to, we like kind of can't do that. But they said that we adapt to common facial features in about 5 minutes. So just simply being exposed to people from another ethnicity, after about 5 minutes, we can start to easily telling them apart. Okay, because we kind of block out unimportant stuff. So, and that's why I have these three, John Mulaney, Dave Chappelle, and Zhang, okay, because they're all from different ethnicities. And hopefully you know who they are. Hopefully at least you know who Dave Chappelle is. In my opinion, the greatest comedian of all time. Okay. All right, are there any questions about any of that? Okay, so I'm Rick. Yes, Connor, I'm Rick James. Yeah. Oh man, Chappelle Show was so good. Okay, so um, go ahead and go to Unit 4 and make a copy of this. You're going to be using this for the rest of the day today. And we are going to talk about learning or get started on it. We're not going to do much right now. I'm going to try to keep it as close to synchronous as possible. I don't, is it there for everyone else? Then, I mean, did you go to, I mean, nobody else has said anything about this today. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'll put it in the, here's, here's it in the chat. Because I don't know I don't know what to tell you there. All right, so we're kind of, so we've got kind of like the basis of everything now. These first 3 units are kind of just like laying the groundwork. Now we're going to start getting into more hypothetical stuff, more conceptual stuff, but also more stuff of like trying to understand human behavior. Okay, we're getting into the meat of the class now. All right, and we're going to we're going to build on what we have already learned. So this next unit is learning. Now, in this unit, when we talk about learning, we're not necessarily talking about learning in the sense of like what you do in school. Because I think there's a strong argument for what you do in school is not actually learning. Okay? It's memorizing, it's trying to figure out how to get an A on a test with doing as little work as possible, but it's not necessarily learning. Because learning is acquiring new information or behaviors due to experience, and it should be a long lasting change. And I don't think, for the most part, what you do in high school is a long lasting change. All right. Most of it, you remember it long enough to take the test and then boom, it's done. All right. I'm hoping that maybe that this class, but and I don't blame you for that. A lot of what you do in high school, the way that American high schools are set up is so like, you know, the vast majority of the stuff that you learn like is not really worth much. I can tell you like I have never had to use like the Pythagorean theorem to figure out like where to put a couch in a living room, okay, or like anything like that. Now, some of you who are going to go into math or whatnot, science, whatnot, but like, you know, I don't have to diagram sentences to be able to like do anything in particular. So I think that a lot of what you learn in high school is worthless. But that's one of the things that I think is good about this class is, and maybe I'm biased, all right, is that you're actually learning stuff in this class that is kind of useful just in daily life, right? Because we're learning how how and why people behave the way that we do, the way that they do. Now, does anybody remember from Unit 2? As I was saying, what we're talking about in this Learn It is basically how we learn to adapt and change our behaviors. Okay. Now, does anybody remember what is the biological basis for learning? When we get down to the neurological level, what is learning? It's not creating new neurons necessarily. Yes, Aditi, new neural networks. Yep. Learning at its core is the creation of synaptic connections, what is called long-term potentiation. So the early studies of learning were done by the behaviorists. And for the first couple of days of this unit, we're going to talk about the behaviorists and their view on learning and human behavior. Early field founded by this guy right here, John Watson, whose main contribution to psychology was to see if they could teach a baby to be afraid of something they weren't afraid of before by linking it up with something that they were afraid of. They banged a gong in a baby's ear whenever they showed it a furry animal, right? Right, and kind of what is called classical conditioning and showing how classical conditioning can be used on humans. That's what you're gonna start learning about that today. And then it was expanded by this guy, B.F. Skinner, who is awesome, who looked at how we learn, Sam, or it could be, yeah, looked at how we learn our behaviors from behaving a certain way and then that behavior having a consequence, what is called operant conditioning. Now, the big thing with the behaviorists is they thought that psychology it should only be the study of observable behavior. Don't be scared of furry animals when it's older. They actually, we'll talk about little Albert next class probably. Okay, should only be the study of observable behavior, what we do. All right, they didn't have any concern with mental processes. Does anybody remember why they didn't have any concern with mental processes? We've talked about behaviorism already. Anyone? Why did they only want to study behavior? They didn't care what we were thinking. Yep, okay. They believed that behavior was objective and learned as a response to the environment. Yep. Behavior is objective. I can say, I can see you doing this, but your feelings about it are subjective. You can tell me one thing and be thinking the other thing, or you can be doing something and not be wanting to do it. Right? Think about your dog. Right? Your dog learns to sit because your dog knows that it's going to get a treat when it sits. Now, your dog might be sitting there thinking, this asshole making me sit again, all right, but I'm still going to do it because I'm going to get something good out of it. That's why they only care about behavior, all right, because they don't care, like, all right, it only matters if you're doing it, not what you're thinking while you're doing it. Okay, all right, a couple more things. So the behaviorists studied what is called associative learning. Associative learning is when we learn to link two events or two stimuli together. Okay? Oftentimes they are two unrelated things, too. What is called conditioning? Conditioning is another word for learning. And this process of learning the association between these things is called acquisition. So you learn at an early age that when you see lightning, what's probably going to come next? which is called thunder. You remember there's that horrible Imagine Dragons song, lightning and the thunder. Okay. And, oh my God, I hate, I can't stand Imagine Dragons. I cannot. I haven't dived into their full cat. I can only speak to the songs that I've heard like on the radio, and Lightning and the Thunder is, in my opinion, not a good song. Okay. Huh? Because the chorus is lightning, lightning and the thunder. Okay. All right. Um, I just think bands like that are just kind of lame. So we learn that when there's lightning, there's about to be thunder, and a lot of times, especially little kids, when there's lightning, what do they learn to do right after they see lightning? Cover your ears or tense up or whatnot. That's classical conditioning. Okay, same thing as when you learn like watching a scary movie. So I was watching the new Netflix show Haunting of Bly Manor last night, which I highly recommend if you like. And the first season, The Haunting of Hill House, is, in my opinion, one of the scariest shows of all time. But like when you start seeing stuff in scary movies and you start to like tense up because you know something's about to come, that's associative learning. Same thing as if like you know you sneak out of the house. I got to imagine it's hard for you all to sneak out of the house now with all of the different technology that like, yeah, with all the alarm systems and Life 360. I don't know. Some of your parents may have put like a chip in you to just follow you. Like, I have no idea, but I would imagine it's hard to sneak. But if you sneak out of the house and your parents catch you, all right, and then they punish you. They ground you, they take away your phone. All right, in theory, that's learning the association between sneaking out and getting punished. So, in theory, that would decrease that behavior. Now, in reality, we'll talk more about this later. Does punishment actually usually decrease a behavior? Not really. What does it usually just make you do? It makes you angry, all right? And as I think Nicholas said, it makes you just figure out how to get away with it, right? Okay. Punishment, we'll talk more about this in a couple classes. Punishment does not work to change behavior. And that's not just me saying it. That was B.F. Skinner, who spent his life researching this stuff. That was his belief. All right. So as I said, last thing, there are two types of associative learning, one of which you're going to learn about today during asynchronous. Classical conditioning is where we learn to associate two previously unrelated things because it allows for us to anticipate what is going to happen next. When there's lightning, there's going to be a loud noise afterwards, which makes you jump. And so, in response to jumping, you tense up after the lightning, getting ready for the loud noise. All right. There is there if I put on a red light and then blow a puff of air in your eye and you blink because of the puff of air, eventually you might blink as soon as you see the red light because it indicates that there's about to be a puff of air in your eye. All right. Classical conditioning is also called respondent behavior because we are simply responding to our environment. And it allows us to predict what is going to happen next. Operant conditioning, on the other hand, is when we learn that a behavior has a certain consequence. And by consequence, we mean something good or bad for this course. And if you do something and you get something good from it, it makes you more likely to do it again. It's called reinforcement. And if you do something and you get something bad for it, it makes you less likely to do it again. What's called punishment. So these are the two types of learning, two types of associative learning that you need to associate with the behaviorists. Because they're all about how do you behave, not how you think. All right? Any questions on that?